This is the one that has a reputation for being kind of goofy. So
keep the change.
Rightfully so.
It did not hit me as to where that was going to end up.
How could it? How in the world could it, Josh? I mean, there's not a lot of subtlety in this film. I don't think that's a controversial statement, but
this, I will say, is a moment of genius in this movie.
Yeah. Because it's not just that, it's still a spy movie. It's still an action flick. It becomes Smokey and the Bandit for about 20 minutes of screen time.
I'm so glad you said that. Oh, we've got a lot to talk about, my friend. We have a whole lot to talk about. She looks over at me and she goes, "This is a weird movie."
Yeah. Yes.
And there's going to be a moment where you're going to look at me and go, "Is this really still happening?"
Uh-huh.
Because this fucking boat chase goes on forever.
There's no other Bond movie quite like this one.
Welcome back, everyone, to For New Eyes Only, the James Bond retrospective podcast where I'm watching the movies for the first time.
When
Welcome
you
back.
were young and your heart was
an open
book.
book. Are we singing the McCartney version or the Guns N' Roses version?
You used to say, live and let live. My favorite part of that song is when he does the bought in this ever change. You know that note Axl hits, like when he sounds like Dracula in Forgetting Sarah Marshall. It's so good.
Blood will run down his face when he is decapitated. Ah!
I can't.
You've already got me way off track.
Yeah,
All
what
right.
are we doing today, Josh?
Today, well, it's the new year and a new Bond. It's Roger Moore era time. We've finished the Connerys. If you'd like to listen to our take on the Connery series and the one, the only, the best on Her Majesty's Secret Service, you can go back. There will be a playlist that I'll link to in the description below if you want to go back and watch those episodes and see what we thought of Connery.
Yeah.
But now it's 73 and it's Roger Moore time, everybody. Holy shit, we're here.
Doesn't it feel insane that it's only 2 years between Diamonds Are Forever and this movie? Doesn't it feel like a lifetime?
When it started, it was like, okay, this is like a Bond movie.
Yeah.
This isn't. Okay, this doesn't feel like a Bond movie at all. Like this is a fucking movie. Let's just say that.
Before we started recording, we just kept starting sentences with this fucking movie and then like not finishing our thought because we're like trying to save it so hard for the show. And look, judging from the comments on our episodes and also just being a Bond fan in the world, I know that there's trepidation entering the Moore era. Some people really don't enjoy this take on Bond or this era, and while I think it has its ups and downs, I am here to tell you guys that I fucking love Live and Let Die. So I'm just gonna throw out my truth right there up top.
I have to say, when we started this podcast, we've touched on it briefly throughout the time we've been talking about the Connery movies. As I said at the end of our last episode, where we recapped the Connery era, I know Roger Moore as Bond. He's the first person I ever associated with the name James Bond.
Because the only classic one before we did this show that you'd seen was A View to a Kill, right?
Right. A View to a Kill, Christopher Walken, Grace Jones. I remember it fondly, but I have not seen it in decades. So once we revisit it, it's going to be a fresh take. So it's still going to be one of those that we're going to have fun talking about, I'm sure.
Yes.
But coming into this era, I was like, man, like I'm just so excited. I'm ready for a change in some things, which is weird considering we have Guy Hamilton back behind the camera directing this one.
We got Tom Mankiewicz writing this one again.
So, I mean, we've got a lot of people coming back from the Connery era to do this one. I wanted to talk to you a little bit, too, about, because you know way more about the novels and everything than I do.
Yeah.
Are we still in the era of basing them on the novels, or are we getting past that?
So what's funny about Live and Let Die, the novel, is that I got all my shit today. It's the second of Fleming's books. And so it picks up pretty shortly after the events of Casino Royale, and Bond is fully in I don't trust anybody mode, right?
Right.
That being said, this is a really loose adaptation in a lot of ways.
I wanted to do Live and Let Die because I thought it had more of an edge to it, because all the villains were black, and I knew it was a very chancy thing because we were making it in the time of the Black Panthers. We were making it in the time of really a black revolution.
The film adaptation weirdly adds and subtracts things almost in equal measure, to the point where like there are extra characters, extra identities, some double crosses that are not in the book. The book primarily takes place in in Jamaica and in Miami, and the Miami is traded out for New Orleans in the movie.
I was watching some of the behind the scenes stuff, and Guy Hamilton was talking about
what else is in New Orleans. Well, there are jazz funerals.
Yeah, and he's a huge jazz fan, and so like that was like they were like, well, of course that's where we got to go.
In about 5 minutes flat, we conned up that sequence.
And then he had to come up with a reason to stay in New Orleans.
I knew that Mr. Broccoli and Mr. Saltzman were not going to send a large unit to New Orleans just to shoot 4 minutes screen time. What else is in New Orleans, Tom? The canals, the levees. Oh, that sounds good.
He was like, well, I want to stay down there and just go hang out and listen to jazz and drink all the time. So he's like, I got to find something to do. And that's where they added more to it. So
the filet of soul and all that stuff. And and in the book, the villain is Mr. Big. Dr. Kananga does not exist in the book.
Wow, that's weird considering where this movie goes, because you'd think it would be written that way. That's crazy.
The book is very concerned with the drug trade, and but the drug trade is more of a front for a SMERSH operation that is trafficking 17th century doubloons to finance Soviet spy activity in the United States.
Wow.
So it's still heavily entrenched in the Blofeld of it all, before Blofeld's even, properly introduced. But it's like, we know SMERSH is behind all of this stuff. So go find Mr. Big, this crime lord who works for the Soviets. And so that's like the big driving force of the book. Now, the book also is the one that's the hardest to read now, because I've touched on this a little bit before on the show. Ian Fleming had some very peculiar and not great views on people that were different from him. And that really comes out in this book, where all of the villains pretty much are Black people, and quite often he writes their dialogue phonetically, which comes off like a really gross caricature.
My name is James is for tombstones, baby. Y'all take this honky out and waste him now.
The movie tries to kind of sidestep this by being all things at once, right? I mean, the big thing here is this is the blaxploitation Bond, quote unquote, right? This is like taking cues from Shaft and Foxy Brown and stuff like that. But the problem is then we get into territory of still all of the villains are Black,
right?
And we're doing some really weird cultural appropriation stuff with not really taking the time to understand how certain religions and practices work. And just sort of othering it for the sake of a spectacle. That being said, I think this movie is greater than the sum of its parts somehow. Like, this whole thing kind of congeals into a very weird trip that I really enjoy, because it's not just that, it's still a spy movie. It's still an action flick. It becomes Smokey and the Bandit for about 20 minutes of screen time.
I'm so glad you said that. Oh, we've got a lot to talk about, my friend. We have a whole lot to talk about.
This is just a weird fucking movie, and holding it all together is the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mr. Roger Moore. Oh goodness, there he is.
There he is, right here on my Live and Let Die laser disc.
Yeah, I'll see your laser disc and I'll raise you the vinyl soundtrack.
Okay.
I really enjoy this movie. This was a favorite. And if I'm being totally honest, for the longest time when I was a kid, Roger Moore was my James Bond.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like his were the ones that played on TV the most often, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
And they're certainly the silliest ones. So I think I really glommed onto that as a kid because I'm like, I can't really I'm not really interested in the plot of From Russia with Love at, 8 years old.
Right.
But I'll watch Roger Moore run around in the jungle with Christopher Lee as long as you want me to.
Well, this is one this is the first Roger Moore. I know Roger Moore from his last Bond movie, so I'm starting to see a few things that I do remember from A View to a Kill begin here. We'll talk about them when we get into the movie a little bit, but certain tropes and certain ways they set up events to happen throughout the movie, it seems like that's just going to be kind of a cut and paste formula as we go forward.
There are certainly diminishing returns for a lot of things he does. And for better or worse, I mean, he's the classy Bond, right? Like he's like the gentleman Bond. Hence why I have a bottle of wine and a cheap charcuterie board over here. I'm doing it up tonight. I'm celebrating our fancy man.
I had to do my specially pressed coffee just in honor of Bond's snazzy little coffee maker he's got there.
Is that all it does?
So I don't, yeah, exactly. I don't know if you noticed this, but like his Bond specifically, they were like, we made the mistake with Lazenby of trying to hew too close to Connery, right?
Guy said, I think we should avoid any direct comparisons by you not saying the things that Sean said.
A martini, shaken, not stirred. Bourbon, no ice, please. He
smokes cigars instead of cigarettes.
Yep.
He typically wears tan suits instead of black or gray or white.
There's a blue suit that we're going to talk about.
Holy shit, that suit! Yeah. And then there's one other thing. I mean, there's a couple. Oh, the other thing was he wasn't allowed to like raise his eyebrow because like he was famous for doing that on The Saint. That was like his big thing on that TV show.
The first issue was that they were making sure that he never raised his eyebrow as he had done in The Saint, because that was like a famous mannerism of his.
I mean, we've all done the Bond pictures. We all know each other, and for a newcomer to come in, it's a very daunting experience.
Guy Hamilton, I think, was more worried about me taking over Bond than I was.
And Roger took it very well indeed.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
He had been like a near miss to play this character for so long.
Right. I believe originally for Dr. No, I believe they wanted to try and cast him.
We originally planned to use Roger Moore when we made Dr. No, but he wasn't available. He was working on television.
Yeah, he was mentioned for that. I think he came back up in the conversation around On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
We talked briefly about how he was part of the conversation along with Adam West.
That's right.
Which, again, I said in our last episode that I'm starting to see a lot of similarities between Adam West and Roger Moore. And with this movie, it doesn't help. I'll just say that because there's a few scenes in this movie that I felt like I could have been watching Batman 66.
Totally.
Precisely.
100%. Yeah. And that's an odd thing, right? That like United Artists, that half of the production company really keep pushing for an American to play James Bond.
You know, this is a very American James Bond movie. I know they go to a few different places, but I mean, New York, New
primarily,
Orleans.
yeah, we're in Harlem and New Orleans, which you were telling me before the recording about a couple of people that were up for the part.
Yeah, I was. There's two that I didn't know about, and one that I did. Steve McQueen, I knew they had approached him about that, and then there was Paul Newman. Both, I mean, Steve McQueen as Bond, I think could work, but we don't live in a world where that's going to be a possibility anymore. But the other one that I was very happy to find out about was Burt Reynolds.
And the favorite was for a while, Burt Reynolds.
I'd seen a TV show, and I thought the guy was terrific, had all the right elements for Bond.
Cubby had a thing about Bond being over 6 feet. He wanted Bond to be tall. And the second and most important thing was, he said, you can't do Bond and not have him be British. It's absolutely ridiculous. It would be like casting an Englishman in a John Wayne part in a Western. It doesn't work.
Wild.
Because this movie turns into Smokey and the Bandit at the end, I just think that would have been the wildest ride if we would have seen Burt Reynolds as Bond.
It would be, I mean, it would go down in history as, I mean, everyone would just say that's the one with Burt Reynolds, right? Like,
right.
Because there's no way they'd have him do it twice.
Well, I can see he's going to be a major asset.
Other names that came up were Julian Glover, who folks might know as Walter Donovan from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. He would eventually go on to play a villain in a later James Bond movie. Also, John Gavin came back up again. Jeremy Brett. Anthony Hopkins was mad about playing the role, and he was just like, I don't think that makes any sense.
I also found out that this was technically not the first time Moore played Bond.
Really?
He played Bond as a comedy bit on like a television show.
No kidding.
In I believe 64.
Roger Moore played James Bond from 1973 through 1985 in the official James Bond film series. As it turned out, he also played James Bond once before, in the summer of 1964, on a short-lived TV series called Mainly Millicent.
But it's hilarious.
Wow.
It's like Bond going on vacation, and even when he's on vacation, he can't seem to like get away. And all the villains he's seeing are on vacation as well. It's a really funny bit.
Oh, that sounds great.
Oh.
Yes, and I'm 007, as if you didn't know.
James Bond, what are you doing at my hotel?
And what may I ask is Sonia Slakova, Russia's master spy, staying at my hotel?
Oh, please.
Oh, please, let's behave like normal people on a holiday. Wait up!
Yes, sir.
But I know you. Me, sir? Ah! Oh! Ah! Wait up! Bring me another waiter.
But I was like, oh, wow, he actually did play Bond before this.
Have you ever seen that sketch where Steve Martin plays James Bond, and he's like, it's from Saturday Night Live, and he's not allowed to, he finds out he's not allowed to expense this latest mission, so he keeps like ordering stuff, and they're just being like when he gets the bill, it's so fucking funny. He asks the waiter, he's like, do you have any complimentary nuts?
I would absolutely 100% watch a Steve Martin Bond movie.
Nice.
Oh, yes.
Beer, sir? Shake it.
We also almost had Diana Ross in the role of Solitaire.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool as well.
Which I, might have gone a long way towards giving another black character some agency in this movie. But, unfortunately, like after they cast Jane Seymour, they cast Gloria Hendry as Rosie Carver. That's sort of like, okay, well, we're making up for that by casting this part. But like we'll get to Rosie when we get to Rosie.
Yeah. All right. Well, Nathan, before we start talking about this movie,
of course,
why don't you tell us what the plot is in 7 seconds or less?
I will do my very best.
3, 2, 1, go.
After several agents turn up dead, Bond investigates drug lord Mr. Big and runs afoul of a voodoo conspiracy.
6.46 seconds. Coming in under the wire.
Still got it, baby.
We might as well just get into talking about the movie. I mean, but this feels like a Bond opening.
Yeah.
And you've got the
Sleepy UN meeting, everybody kind of like saying their piece.
And a death right off the top. I mean, death by audio.
Death by audio that is deployed like it's a dynamite plunger.
Right.
Like it's a really funny little device. But really good. Like we get that shot of Kananga and Solitaire just sort of calmly watching while the one guy like just pitches over into his seat.
It took me the second watch to notice that Kananga and Solitaire were there. Actually,
yeah, I
missed that the first time.
Well, because the first time you're watching, you don't have any reason to be like, oh, who are these folks, right? And and the jazz funeral.
Yes, that was unexpected.
That's the scene that always hooks me. Every time I watch it, I'm like, damn, that's good.
And yes, I mean, by the time you figure out what's going on there, I was like, whoa, all right, this is kind of cool. I like where we're going with this.
Whose funeral is it? Yours.
And everyone just sort of like breaking out and getting so happy, like it becomes joyous.
The trick coffin when they walk up with the coffin.
Isn't that great?
Oh, I love that. I loved it. But yeah, then there's the voodoo ritual, and I was like, I kind of knew this movie was going to go into this territory.
Sure.
But I didn't expect where it goes immediately. In the movie.
With the fakest snake I've ever seen in my life, which kills a guy. Well, and it at this point, you're like, oh, I've watched 3 different short films before. And where the hell is James Bond? Right.
Because we end this scene by, we've got another death with the snake, which let me just, I'll go ahead and say the note that I wrote right here. Fuck snakes. I hate snakes. Snakes suck. Dude. I don't want anything to do with snakes. I hate snakes in movies. I hate snakes in real life.
Yeah.
And every time I see snakes, I'm just like, fuck this movie.
You're a real Indiana Jones type.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought up Indiana Jones because I've got some Indiana Jones notes as we go through this movie.
Do you?
Also.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that's exciting. I mean, yeah, you can draw probably a pretty straight line from this movie to Temple of Doom in a lot of ways.
Temple of Doom. I mean, I think we've got a little bit of Last Crusade in here as well. I'll get to that here shortly.
I mean, the Indiana Jones movies were Spielberg doing Bond in a way. Especially the third one. He casts James fucking Bond in it.
Yeah, I mean, Indiana Jones is just rugged 007, man. I mean, that's all it really is. He's dealing with history, and we're dealing with politics in a sense.
Right.
So
sure. Go into this lady superimposed over a match. Turns into a fucking skull on fire, and we're into this badass opening title sequence.
I mean, we got the devil. We got the devil and the tarot cards. The tarot cards are a big part of this movie.
Great opening. And great... Yo, go ahead.
This song, Live and Let Die, we kind of touched on this at the end of the last episode with McCartney, my man.
Yeah.
And like, dude...
Is this your favorite theme yet?
It's not only my favorite theme, this is my favorite opening so far.
Yeah. It's really good.
It's just the skulls definitely just give it the edge for me, but the fire, the skulls, all the voodoo shit, it's a great time watching it. Along with the song, it works so well.
I love the entire soundtrack for this movie. John Barry was busy working on something else, and so they brought in George Martin.
Yes,
the Beatles producer to compose this entire score. He brought along McCartney and Wings. Harry Saltzman was super excited to work with McCartney because he passed on distributing A Hard Day's Night years ago. And so he was like, I made a fucking mistake. The next time I get to work with a Beatle, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And so he's like, okay. But the story is that when George Martin handed the completed song to Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, their response was essentially, that's one hell of a demo. Now who's gonna do it in the movie? Like they'd already hired like this jazz singer, what's her name? BJ Arnault, who plays the cabaret singer later in the movie.
Yeah, and she has the performance of it later in the movie.
Yeah, they wanted that to be the theme song of the movie, and George Martin was essentially like, no, guys, you hired a Beatle.
Yeah.
Like he's doing the theme song for the movie.
I think that should just be a thing that in life, if you ever have the chance to do anything with a Beatle, you do it. I mean, there's no yes or no about it.
This leads me to the petition I've made for Ringo Starr to do the theme song to the next Bond movie. He's just a cover of Skyfall. Let the sky fall. Yeah, great song, great opening sequence. The song was nominated for an Oscar. I mean,
unfortunately lost,
but lost to The Way We Were by Barbra Streisand, which is a great song.
Yes, it is.
But it always makes me think of that scene in The Naked Gun 2.5 where like Priscilla Presley is singing it in the shower and the assassin starts singing along.
Of the smiles we left behind.
It's been a while since I've seen the Naked Gun movies.
Quite a while. Good. The first one especially is so good.
Lieutenant, the feeling is mutual. Nice to meet you, too.
And yeah, we finally join James Bond, who has bedded an Italian agent.
And let me say, the spectacle that they kind of led on to with Lazenby's casting as Bond.
Yes.
A new Bond, new this, new that, blah, blah, blah. This is so
casual.
Yeah, like, here's your Bond. Like, it's.
They don't even do the lead up. Like, they're not shooting him from behind. They're not, like, obscuring his face. Like, no, it's just Roger Moore shirtless in bed. Hey, guys, you knew he was going to play him eventually. Here he is.
It's almost like they felt like they had learned a lesson from On Her Majesty's, and they were like, we're not going to go big with this again.
I don't expect them to cheer and laugh when he first appears. He's got to earn their respect, and I think he'll do this very quickly.
In a sense, the filmmakers were trying to make it that way. It was like, okay, earn your keep, be the new Bond.
So this brings me to another book that I have here in my collection, Roger Moore's James Bond Diaries, which was published back in '73 and remained out of print for over 40 years.
Wow.
Until it was republished in 2018 when Moore passed away. And I was searching for this for years, could never find it. My parents, on a trip to Scotland, sent me a photo of just a shelf of James Bond books. And I said, go back. One of them says Roger Moore, Live and Let Die, not Ian Fleming. And sure enough, it was this fucking book that is like, impossible to find. So I was like losing my mind. In this book, it's literally his day-to-day making the movie. And it is a blast and a half. If you have a chance to, now it's easier to get. I think the hardcover is like $12 on Amazon. But he talks about the pressure going into the movie. How he felt like the new kid almost the whole time he was making the movie. He called Guy Hamilton General Hamilton because he was like, the guy is like a fucking, he's given marching orders on set. He knows exactly what he wants at all times. And he said he had all of these interviews where he would, like, they kept asking him the same question. Everyone wanted to know, how was your Bond different from Sean Connery? And he was getting progressively more and more angry. Here's a quote from the novel, or from the diaries. I'm trying to think of new, bright answers to the same questions. How is your Bond going to be different from Sean's Bond is the inevitable question, to which I inevitably reply, well, he is he and I am me. And then my other favorite one is he talks to another person and he says, they're like, how is your Bond going to be different from Sean Connery's Bond? I'm absolutely fed up with being asked that, and I have at last thought of an answer. I will ask writers how their column's going to be different from everybody else's column. He also tells a story about his son Jeffrey not accepting that he's playing James Bond. And then he said, just before we left England, he asked me, can you beat anybody, including a robber? Oh, yes, I replied confidently. Supposing James Bond came in, he persisted. Daddy's going to play James Bond, I explained. I know that, he sighed impatiently. I mean the real James Bond, Sean Connery. Like, the whole book is full of, like, little anecdotes like that. And just kind of the day-to-day filming stuff. This guy went through hell to make this movie. He had kidney stones. His kids were getting sick. He was dealing with, like, it's also about him, like, dealing with a, like, culture shock because he's shooting primarily in America.
Yeah.
And he's just like, he's like, what the fuck is trick-or-treating? Why do they do that here?
There's on the Blu-ray for this, there's like a lost interview with Moore and Guy Hamilton.
To my horror, I realized that I would have to get myself in a much fitter condition than I normally keep myself.
He talks about how they had made him get in shape. He had to lose some weight. He was like spending hours in the pool before going into to work, and then hours afterwards. Like, he was always swimming, trying to lose the weight and whatnot. So
he has a line in the book where he's like, I wanted ice cream today, which is unfortunately not part of James's diet.
It's crazy, man, how we're so obsessed as a culture on, like, how someone's going to portray a character like that we love, you know?
Right. I would also, total side note, track down this book for weird little, there's one tangent where in just a single paragraph, he, as an aside, mentions the district attorney of New Orleans invited him back to his office, where he revealed that he'd been doing his own research into the Kennedy assassination, showed them footage from the day of the assassination. And Roger Moore says, I am not at liberty to disclose what I saw, but it left no doubt in my mind that it was not Lee Harvey Oswald who fired the fatal shot.
Honey, you want to know who really killed JFK?
And we talked about The Rock last week.
Right.
Involving...
Isn't that insane? And he's just like, what if he's like, I can't tell you this, but Sean Connery was there that day. Like, but it is fully insane that that's just like a blurb in this book. Please go read it. But you're right. Like, yeah, we're not going to make this a big deal. We're just going to... This is Bond now, fucking deal with it.
Yeah. And then it sort of changes the way it changes its formula right here, because instead of Bond coming into MI6, tossing the hat, seeing Moneypenny, we've got him coming to his house
in the middle of the night,
like 5:30 in the morning or something like that. Now this right here is where I got my first hint of Indiana Jones. This feels like the scene where he asked him to go look for...
They want you to get a hold of the Ark before the Nazis do, and they're prepared to pay handsomely for it. And
no, absolutely. And I love this sequence. I do miss Q terribly, but
Dude, I was so fucking bummed. I was like, okay, I mean, they mention Q here, but we get through the whole movie, and by the end of it, I was like...
Oh, we're not going to see Q, are we?
Where the fuck is Q? I was so sad to not see Q in this.
It was apparently a weird scheduling conflict, and there was weird schedule stuff throughout this whole movie. So, like, he was shooting a TV series. He actually managed to get 3 weeks off so that he could come film. And then they were like, oh, we've already rewritten the scene. It's fine. You don't have to show up. So he was really pissed off about that. Lois Maxwell, who tried to get more money for Diamonds Are Forever, just came back for the same rate in this one. And they kept moving her days around so much that they ended up paying her more in overtime than they would have paid her if she had actually gotten the rate she asked for.
Or should I say, ciao, bello.
According to Roger Moore, she bought a fur coat with the extra cash.
Yeah. But this is where we establish this new dynamic between M and Moneypenny and Bond here. Sure. Seems like M hates this Bond a whole lot more than he hated Connery's.
In future, Commander, allow me to suggest a perfectly adequate watchmaker just down the street.
He threatens to shoot him.
Yes.
Powerful enough to even deflect the path of a bullet.
I feel very tempted to test that theory right now.
I'm a big fan of when Bond uses his espresso machine and M just goes, "Is that all it does?" Yeah, M does not seem impressed by anything in this place. But Moneypenny's ride or die.
Yeah, I find it weird that Moneypenny's here. Honestly,
yeah. Just to do some secretarial stuff too, like, oh, here's your tickets, here's your flight information.
Right. And that's what makes it weird that this isn't happening in MI6. Like, this is exactly what they would do there. I'm at the point now with Moneypenny and Bond where I'm like, what is this relationship?
Right.
Because, you know, she's covering for him, but we know she's got a thing for him. Yeah. It's just, at this point, I'm feeling like, guys, you gotta do something about it, or just let it go.
Or just let it go. Yeah.
Yeah. So
this is the weirdest one too, because she covers for him with the Italian agent. Makes a little joke about it,
and she wants to go again. She was happy with Bond's work last night.
Sheer magnetism, darling. I think that moment when he unzips her dress with his magnetic watch.
Yes.
Is the moment you can tell if you're going to have fun with this one or not.
Right.
Right? Like, yep. I think you're either on board or nah. I do love also that we smash cut from Bond unzipping her dress to Solitaire reading tarot and saying, "A man comes." And I'm like, yeah, he does. Primarily, that's what he does.
The fool comes.
he travels with others. I don't know if you noticed this. The deck has like a very stylized 007 pattern on the back of the cards.
I did not notice that.
Yeah. They had originally tried to get Salvador Dali to design a tarot deck for them. And then when he told them his rate, they were like, oh, never mind.
Aim for the stars. You see what you get. Now, you bring up Solitaire, so we'll go ahead and talk about Jane Seymour a little bit.
Yeah, her first movie.
Her first movie.
She's like 22 in this, I think.
I sent you a text when I was watching this the first time because it was halfway through the fucking movie before I realized that was Jane Seymour.
Oh, yeah?
Yes. I saw her name in the title, so I was kind of expecting to see her, but I don't know what it was about the way they were presenting Solitaire in the first half of this movie.
You're just like, where's the medicine woman?
Right. I was like,
call me.
She's very glammed up in this movie. I mean, we talked a little bit about appropriation at the beginning of this movie, but she's in a lot of headdresses, a lot of robes, a lot of her eyeliner an eyeshadow for the first half of this movie was delivered by God herself. I mean, like the way it is like winged perfectly. She is a vision in this film. I think she's so great for the first half of the movie. And then we lose her to the Bond trope of now she has to be rescued constantly.
Yep. I like Solitaire a lot.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I really like the relationship between her and Bond in this movie.
I agree. There's some iffy, icky stuff.
Yeah.
It starts in an icky place, and then it seems like they flirt with the idea of this being like legit.
Right.
But then we don't ever really get a moment between them where they have a conversation about it. It's just now she's just can't keep her hands off of him, right? Like that's like the extent of it by the end of the movie. It's a little bit of a bummer. Because I think he has better chemistry with almost everyone else in this film.
Yeah.
But we do, I don't know, like you're saying, it's very low key for a lot of this movie. We get the most downplayed airport arrival in a Bond movie yet, right?
Right.
Gets in his car. We are quickly introduced to David Hedison as Felix Leiter, our latest and greatest Felix, perhaps.
Another Felix Leiter.
He is maybe behind Jack Lord, my favorite so far that we've had. I don't know what it is about this guy's line delivery. It's the fact that he sounds like an old school car salesman, but like I really fucking like David Hedison. He's the Felix that I think most plays the annoyance with Bond's shenanigans.
You what?
So we get this great sequence where Whisper shoots Bond's driver with a dart from his window.
Another gadget.
a really good gadget. Bond trying to wrest control. The car, really great stunt of it hitting the stairs. And Bond kind of downplays the whole thing, but then we cut to Felix going, "Get me a make on a white pimp mobile."
Oh yeah. That was one of the ones where Jenny went, wow, when we were watching this.
And now I'm just realizing, what if David Lynch was Felix Leiter?
I got a girl that's been murdered, 17 years old.
Listen here, Coop. Mr. Big runs these streets.
Oh God. That would be great. I want like a David Lynch Bond movie. I'll play my hand on this right now. This is my favorite like action sequence of the movie.
Oh, the car chase when his driver dies and he's trying to like get the car back. Yeah,
like when it happens, Jenny and I watched it last night. And when that happens, I literally was just like, this would be scary as shit if this happened. Like, how would you get control of the vehicle? Nobody knows what's going on around you.
Guy Hamilton's so good with vehicular stuff. I mean, we get those great chases in Goldfinger.
Right.
We get the exceptional Las Vegas chase in Diamonds Are Forever, and which I think is really fun despite the weird editing shit and continuity errors. But like, this movie is packed to the gills with some of the best chase sequences in a Bond film.
It might have one too many. I'll go ahead and say that.
Oh, sure. I remember when we get to the airport, I was like, we just had one 2 minutes ago.
Yeah.
But we are introduced properly to Dr. Kananga, the dictator of San Monique, who knows he's being bugged, plays a fake recording. Like, he's pulling Bond shit, and that's really fun.
Portrayed by Yaphet Kotto.
The incomparable Yaphet Kotto.
Oh my God, dude. I love this guy. I love him.
He's exceptional. He did not enjoy making this movie. He was really bummed out by the final product, and there was some drama on the set because during a publicity shoot, when a ton of the press was there, this is actually covered in Roger Moore's diary, he put up a Black Power symbol, like, for the cameras. And the producers were furious about that. They're like, we're shooting in the fucking South, like the US South in the 70s. Like, what are we going to do?
Right.
And as a result, they like excluded him from further publicity. He wasn't at the film's premiere. Like, it's pretty shitty, like how he was treated after this movie wrapped.
Yeah.
That being said, he's so damn good in this movie.
Yeah. And there's some weird stuff with who the villain is in this movie. And we'll get into that here shortly. But for what ends up happening and how his character turns in the end, I think he's great.
He's great.
He might not be the strongest villain that we've seen so far.
Right.
But I do, it's funny that Guy Hamilton's directing this one. When he directed Goldfinger, he has one of those turns with his plan that I wasn't expecting. And I was like, wow, that's kind of
ingenious.
It is. It's socially aware plan as well. Like, there is a true evil to this plan that, like, I think none of our other villains have even come close to yet. But I agree. He's not given enough a time to shine, really. And the fact that they create this second identity for him doesn't really pay off that well. And that is a weird thing that they changed from the novel, essentially because while location scouting, they found this alligator farm owned by a man named Ross Kananga.
Ross Kananga was the name of the man in real life who owned this crocodile farm.
And so Tom Mankiewicz was like, well, that's got to be the name of our villain. But I want to keep Mr. Big. And so he just creates this alter ego. And it's such a strange choice. Mr. Big in the movie is sort of close to how he's presented in the book, but given way more of like a kind of a Dolomite-esque personality.
Right.
Like in the book, he's he's kind of like gray in the face. In the movie, in the book, they explain that he has like this weird blood condition where his blood runs slowly, like it circulates too slowly, and so he's like, he looks zombified. And so in the book, he has convinced all of these people that work for him that he is the human manifestation of Baron Samedi, the Lord of the Dead, the voodoo king.
This makes a little more sense, like, because
in the movie is made yet another character.
Right. Like, that's what I was going to say is in regard to this is like, you've got this Mr. Big character who's this looming mystery who ends up being Kananga, spoiler. And then, but you've also got to throw in Baron Samedi. And then you've also got some good henchmen in this movie.
Great henchmen.
Teehee and Whisper. Like, you've got a lot of good bad guys here. Unfortunately, all portrayed by black men.
Like, I think we should clarify that when we say unfortunately, we just mean that, like, it's a bummer that almost every black person Bond meets in this movie betrays him in some way or is set up to be a villain. It's unfortunately a holdover from the book where it really leans into some stereotypes and superstitions in a really unfortunate way. And then in the movie, they remove a lot of that context, but still we have the storyline where literally we have this white cop going into Harlem and busting everybody up, and it's sort of creates this atmosphere where it's like, why there's nobody you can trust here. It's kind of a bummer.
They play that whenever they start getting into Bond following the car around, and then everybody is connected to this
whole network. And I love this shit though. Like everybody's got, like, even the shoe shine guy has like a microphone in his toolbox.
And then, I mean, with the icing on the cake being that the cab driver that the cab Bond was just in is in on it as well, you know?
Wild. Yeah.
I kind of like that aspect that everybody is kind of part of this whole crime syndicate here.
Yeah, it's just it's taken as a whole. The movie just kind of indulges in some uncomfortable stereotypes, right?
Yes, big time.
But on the other hand, everyone in this movie is delivering 150% on their performance. Like these are from, I think, the best henchmen we've gotten. So I love Teehee and Whisper. I love Baron Samedi. I don't think it's entirely clear in the movie that Baron Samedi is at all connected to Kananga's operation until they're in a room together.
Right. That's where I was starting to get a little confused as to what was going on. So it was like, I understand now that you're saying in the novel it was that way, where kind of Baron Samedi was this alternate ego.
Or just even like a superstition that he took advantage of. I mean, there's some really, it's the one of Fleming's novels that I'm just like, don't read it. As much as I think there are sections of that book that are unbelievably good, it's really rough. It's a rough sit. Check out the graphic novel adaptation from Dynamite Comics, which somehow manages to use original text from the novel and cuts out the stuff that's like real tough. I love how Roger Moore's Bond is just unflappable. And the question that I wanted to ask you is he too chill for you?
That is something that I was getting weird vibes on, because it seems like in every scenario he's in, he's just kind of looking blankly.
Okay. Well,
and like he's always seems like he's the smartest guy in the room.
Yeah.
Rather a sweeping statement, considering we've never met.
Connery brought some of that swagger as well, but there were moments where you could see Connery playing it like he was unsure of where he was going to go with things.
Right. Yeah, and this is a weird one because he never does anything quite as like blatant as the Lepidoptery monologue from On Her Majesty's, but like this is a Bond who just is never scared, right? Like he walks into the Filet of Soul, everyone stares at him. Waiter, in one of my favorite bits of business, the waiter takes his money and his drink when the booth turns around, all the sound cuts out, and he just kind of gets to his feet and he goes like, well, okay, my name's Bond. Like,
yeah, that another Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade reference right there.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, that was the weird thing watching this time around is just, he seems like he's a little lost in all of this.
I mean, Mr. Big shows up, he starts to tell him what his name is, and he goes, names for tombstones, baby, which is like a fucking great line.
And this is the first time we see Mr. Big, and it's weird because, you know, it's obvious there's something on his face.
Yeah. Can you tell it's Yaphet Kotto? Because I know a lot of folks watching this for the first time are just like, I don't know if that's the same actor.
I didn't think it was him in that scene.
Okay, yeah.
But later when we see him in the makeup, I was like,
before he rips it. Well, they do a really good job of framing him kind of off center in a lot of shots, right? And like or like further back. It's not really until the big reveal that he's like front and center. But yeah, you're right. Like he does seem kind of lost in this scene because like Mr. Big tells them take him out back and waste him, and Bond goes, waste him? Is that a good thing?
Yeah, like he even questions the scenario he's in. There is a fun thing that happens here with Teehee where he shows him the hook hand and everything.
Breaks his gun.
And on my second watch, I was like, wait a minute, is that like to signify that the PPK is gone and now we've got Roger Moore who's going to carry a fucking Smith & Wesson like Dirty Harry in the end of this bitch.
I wish.
But I mean, he does go back to the PPK later in the movie. So I was like, but that could have been a cool thing where, because the way he kind of just drops it in the trash can, it seems like it's sort of like a comedy bit, you know?
Yeah.
And it seems like it could have been a commentary as to where we're moving on from this Bond and this is my Bond with a Smith & Wesson, you know?
Man. That's a good, oh man, I kind of wish they'd done that actually. That's fun. No, instead he has a little meet cute with Solitaire where, you know, he shows her the lover's card and she shows him the fool. You have found yourself. So the guys yank him out back and he goes, now promise you'll stay right there. Shan't be long. And I like this little fight in the alleyway. Where he's like jumping up onto the ladder and kicking him in the face. And
this is another part where I kind of feel like it's an episode of Batman. It seems like I'm watching Batman fight villains.
Sure.
I will say I'm not crazy about Roger Moore's fight choreography in this.
Sure.
Like, we've seen bad from Connery, but like, I'm not really thrilled with any of the hand-to-hand combat I'm seeing in this movie. I'll go ahead and say that.
I think a lot of, we've talked about the lines you can draw from from Bond to Austin Powers, and I think you'll find that a lot of Roger Moore's fight choreography is very much from the school of judo chop.
Right.
It's quick. It's not necessarily. I think he does get a very good hand-to-hand fight in this movie much later. But he definitely doesn't throw a punch like Lazenby or Connery does.
Right.
But we do get this great introduction to Harry Strutter, who shows up to pull a gun on Bond and tell him, like, everybody knows that you're not supposed to be here. Like, they've been tailing you since you were at the airport. This is Lon Satin as Harry Strutter. I just really like this character. I wish there was more of him in the movie.
Well, I didn't really put a whole lot of thought into his character because you don't really see him too many more times.
Right.
It's good that he gets Bond out of the situation. We find out he works for Felix and the CIA.
In a very fun bit where he's got a two-way radio hidden in the cigarette lighter, and Bond calls it a
genuine Felix lighter. Illuminating.
Yeah.
Very illuminating.
Another gadget. Like I said, there's gadgets all over this
gadgets
movie.
out the ass, just because Bond doesn't have all of them.
Right.
We are finally introduced to Baron Samedi, the man who cannot die.
I like this whole dance sequence where it's good. It's a weird introduction to the character.
Yeah.
But
because you're sort of like, well, who is this? What's his deal? Right. And, but it's a good introduction. I think Jeffrey Holder rules. Jeffrey Holder also well known for directing a ton of Broadway shows, including he was the original director for The Wiz. Also won a Tony Award for Best Costume Design, Best Direction of a Musical in 1975. Kind of a genius, and you can tell that he's 100% behind the choreography in this movie. But for me, I wanted to know what you think about this sequence, because I've never really given it much thought until like the last couple of rewatches, and maybe it's because we're watching these in order. And normally this is one of the movies I throw on when I'm like, I've seen this 1,000 times, I don't really want to think about it.
Right.
The hotel clerk tells him Mrs. Bond has been expecting you, and he has a moment of like, Mrs. Bond. And do you feel like that's him thinking about Tracy, or is it just sort of like confusion? I like to think that he's just like, how dare they?
The romantic in me would like to think that he thinks of it that way. However, I think the way Roger Moore plays it, it just seems like, oh, someone's waiting for me.
Someone's lying.
An incurable romantic, Mrs. Bond.
Yeah, that makes sense. And probably the movie is still just like, well, we don't want to, at this point, reference the other movie without Sean Connery.
Right. I think if that was something like a line they dropped in the Daniel Craig movies, Craig could play it that way.
Ooh, yeah.
But I don't think Roger Moore leads you to believe that he's thinking about Tracy at all.
There is, never mind. I don't want to spoil it. There's a couple of pretty fantastic references later on in the series that kind of tells you that they softened on Her Majesty's eventually. But I buy that. I buy that this is just more of something's afoot. And we know because he goes back to his room. We get a classic Bond checking for bugs sequence. Orders a bottle.
More fucking gadgets with a hairbrush with a radio
tap thing. And and he orders 2 glasses and a bottle of Bollinger. And we get another killer snake, which Bond takes care of in a pretty great way.
I didn't see this coming. I don't know why I didn't see it coming, because it's pretty obvious where it was going. But whenever he turned around and flamed that snake, I about lost it, man. I was laughing so hard. And then after that, we get our introduction to Rosie.
Mrs. Bond, I presume?
I'm Rosie Carver.
Rosie. And Rosie's kind of embarrassing. And I cannot figure out because we learn later she's a double agent, right? Like she's working for Kananga, but is her whole vibe, does that mean that she's putting on an act when she's pretending to be a bumbling person? Because there's other times where she sort of bumbles about and it doesn't seem like it would serve her purposes, right? Like thinking Quarrel is going to hurt Bond doesn't really matter to what Kananga wants. Like, it just seems like she's there to lure him to where Baines was killed and then get rid of him the same way.
Right.
And if that's the case, she has all these other opportunities to kill him.
Exactly. And, we've talked about how I was kind of lukewarm on Tiffany Case because she seemed like the smartest woman in the world for one minute and then the dumbest person in the world the next.
You just killed James Bond.
Rosie never seems like she's on the ball, though, which is like why it's so confusing that she's a double agent.
Yeah, I mean, you even get the line from Yaphet Kotto later when he's talking about Rosie knows what.
Rosie has been more efficient than I anticipated.
And there's never a moment and I hate that I'm saying it, but there's never a moment with Rosie where I feel like she's got control of the situation.
No, I agree. Yeah, it's a bummer. Even when the heel turn is revealed, I'm still just like, well, like, what's your game, right?
Yeah.
And I think that I think this is one case where the character is just very thinly written. I think Gloria Hendry's really good. She's just given almost nothing to do, and the bits she's given don't lend themselves to what the character is, right?
Right. She's in the movie very briefly.
Yeah.
And her whole turn in the movie just seems like, why was it even there?
But it's not even really a turn so much as it's James just tells us what the deal is.
Yeah. And if she is working for Kananga, she should, I feel like she should be a lot more present of like how he can handle situations. Right. And she seems so lost on that island.
Well, and it almost seems like it's a more interesting choice, right? To have her play dumb.
Oh, I should have never gotten into any of this. I'm going to be completely useless to you.
Right? Like to make it more obvious that she's pretending to not know what she's doing. Or to have her like be nervous and green but still very good at her job, because then you run into like something like Paloma in No Time to Die.
I know. I've done 3 weeks training.
Who is a character that I just want a whole movie of.
Yes.
And I just feel like we're kind of there. Rosie Carver's neither fish nor fowl here. So she's just kind of a character who's here for a little bit to get killed.
Yeah. And it's sad because whenever they do introduce her, I was like, okay, here's going to be one of our strong female characters that we're going to follow.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have another, since we've got Guy Hamilton back, maybe we've got another Pussy Galore in this in this character. But there's never a moment where I feel like she has anything over Bond or there's, and it's sad because again we've got another character here portrayed by a black actress that takes a turn for the bad.
The first black woman to play a romantic character in a Bond movie as well.
Felix told me there'll be moments like this.
Rosie both deserved better and probably doesn't need to be in the movie at the same time. Like, if you're not going to really do anything with this character, although she does lead to some of my favorite jokes in the movie. Like when she runs into the room with the snake in it.
Oh, a snake. I forgot. I should have told you should never go in there without a mongoose.
Then she sees Samity's calling card, this bloody hat with a feather on top. And he says, "It's just a hat, darling, belonging to a small-headed man of limited means who lost a fight with a chicken." Which is an insane line.
Insane line, but delivered in a way by Moore that just seems like it would be something he would say on an everyday basis.
Yeah. Yes.
It's weird.
This is the first time that this James is properly gross, right? Like she says, like, I don't want you to, like, he's trying to sleep with her. She says no, goes to her room. Now she's scared. It says, don't leave him alone. Don't leave her alone. Yep. And he's like, well, of course. Like this feels like more like something Connery's Bond would do. But Roger Moore is also kind of a creep. His character is, at least.
Well, this is where I'll kind of touch on some things that I remember from A View to a Kill, and then I'm already seeing in my first Roger Moore Bond movie is this, character that we'll introduce as sort of a love interest sort of thing for Bond, but we know she's a double agent.
Yes.
I remember that being the thing with Grace Jones' character in A View to a Kill.
Well, and that was sort of the thing when Roald Dahl was writing You Only Live Twice. He said, like, I was instructed that there had to be 3 girls. There's a femme fatale, there's the love interest, there's the girl who dies, right?
Yep.
And it's like he's like, that's how blunt they made it. As much new stuff as we're trying here, there's still familiar tropes that are starting to feel a little creaky already, right?
Yep.
What also makes me laugh is that because they adapted these out of order, Live and Let Die is the novel where Quarrel is introduced. Now, Quarrel's already died in Dr. No, necessitating the introduction of Quarrel Jr. in this movie.
Rosie Carver, meet the man who shares my hairbrush. Quarrel Jr.
Yeah, Roy Stewart as Quarrel Jr., who I recognize from appearances and stuff like Space 1999 and a couple of classic Doctor Who serials like Tomb of the Cybermen. But like, I think he's really fun in this. I wish he was in a little bit more of it. It is interesting to me that he'd be like, yeah, I'll help you out, even though my dad was killed by a dragon tank when he hung out with you. Bond tips his hand. He reveals, look, I got this tarot card from Solitaire. It tipped me off that you're duplicitous, you're lying, you're a double agent. And she says, you wouldn't kill me, not after what we've just done, Rosie does. And he says, well, I wouldn't kill you before, which is a really fucking gross and weird line. He pulls a gun on her, and in a moment that I have to send to you, which was pointed out on the James Bonding podcast years ago.
Make your choice.
You know what, dude? I noticed that.
Make your choice.
Yep, I abso-fucking-lutely noticed that. I was like, that was weird.
It's super weird. I can't. Do you think it's on purpose?
It has to be, dude. There's no way it's not on purpose.
Make your choice.
Yeah. It was one of the weirdest things I'd ever heard, dude. I'm so glad you brought that up.
I mean, imagine Darth Vader walking in and just being like, I'm Darth Vader, here I come. Like, it'd be insane. No movie would do that.